The first transmission arrived at 0317 UTC, caught by a deep space array in southern Chile. At first, the astronomers thought it was a glitch, an echo bouncing back from some long-forgotten probe. But the signal was clean, structured, repeating in intervals too precise to be natural. Within hours, 5 observatories across the globe had picked it up. The source, HD 98800C, a planet that, according to every chart and telescope, no longer existed. HD 98800CE had been recorded centuries ago as a habitable exoplanet, roughly 150 light-years from Earth, before it inexplicably disappeared from view in the late 2200s. Not obscured, not destroyed, gone. Astronomers debated if the initial discovery had been a mistake. Now, in 2413, it was speaking again. Dr. Eliana Voss stared at the decoded message on the large display in the control room of the International Exoplanetary Observatory. The lines of text scrolled slowly, almost apologetically, as if aware of their gravity. 2027, Paris. A demonstration, one spark ignites a year of unrest. 2031, Atlantic coast, an anomalous surge. 47,000 lives lost. 2035, the Mars outpost, silence. The dates were all in Earth's past. Except they hadn't happened. Not yet. Are we sure this isn't some kind of time-delayed message from Earth? Asked Major Carter of the Space Intelligence Division. He looked more irritated than skeptical, as if hoping the whole thing was just some nerd's prank gone orbital. No, Eliana said, running a hand through her silvering hair. This is coming from the direction where HD 98800CE used to be, and the signal, it's quantum-locked, meaning it was likely sent centuries ago, long before these predicted events. The room fell into a strange hush. Monitors hummed, a kettle somewhere whistled. "So what are we looking at?" said Carter. "A warning?" "Maybe," Eliana whispered. "Or maybe it wants us to believe it's a warning." She didn't say what she feared most, that this was neither a cry for help nor a hoax. That somewhere something had seen our future and was now placing the pieces on the board. Outside, the desert sky glowed with stars, and far beyond them a dead world whispered secrets only time could confirm. 2 days after the first signal, the transmissions became more frequent, each carrying a new set of predictions, each more specific than the last. 2042, Nairobi, water riots, international aid convoy attacked, 17 fatalities. 2047, lunar mining station Gamma 4, collapse, cause, structural sabotage. 2050, Earth orbital array, Sector 19A, AI failure, debris field formation, casualties. 19. None of these events had happened. Yet, the world governments responded in typical fashion, some with panic, others with denial. A joint UNECSA, Earth Colonies Security Alliance Task Force was formed, bringing together scientists, intelligence agents, and skeptics in equal measure. They called themselves the Echo Chamber, a name coined by a sarcastic Australian linguist who claimed the messages sounded like history screaming backwards. Dr. Eliana Voss was reluctantly pulled into the task force, her expertise in deep space communication making her indispensable. She flew to Geneva aboard a silent glide transport, the sky behind her streaked with orbital traffic and satellites blinking like artificial stars. The Echo Chamber's base of operations sat buried beneath a mountain range. Inside, screens lined the walls, each pulsing with data, decoding algorithms, and historical cross-references. It felt less like a lab and more like a war room. "Still think it's a prank?" she asked Carter, who was now in uniform and visibly tenser. "Pranks don't predict future terrorist attacks with down-to-the-minute detail." he replied. If even one of these comes true, it changes everything. The real question, of course, was how the sender knew. Was it a civilization advanced enough to view time like a spatial dimension? Or was it something stranger, something outside of time entirely? Dr. Arun Basu, a physicist from Mumbai with eyes like a tired cat, leaned over the latest batch of decoded data. They've begun referencing individuals, he said. Look, a new message had appeared just hours ago. 2044, Dr. Eliana Voss. Coordinates 46.2044 degrees north, 6.1432 degrees east. Decision point, outcome critical. Her heart skipped. That's here, Basu said softly. Geneva, 2 years from now. Eliana felt cold. The signal hadn't just anticipated events, it had followed her. And as the screens pulsed, another thought crept in like static through a cracked speaker. What if the signal wasn't just warning them? What if it was guiding them? The man showed up at the Geneva facility 3 days after the message named Eliana. He arrived with no identification, no digital signature, and no explanation as to how he had bypassed 5 levels of biometric security. The surveillance footage showed nothing but static during his approach, followed by the odd sight of him stepping through the front checkpoint as if the guards had simply let him pass. He wore a long gray coat, antiquated in style, and carried a small circular device that pulsed with the same frequency as the HD 98800C transmissions. The moment he entered the control room, every monitor flickered, then stilled, blank, as if waiting. Major Carter pulled his sidearm. "Don't move." The man raised both hands slowly, like he'd rehearsed it. "If I meant harm," he said calmly, "none of you would be standing." "Who are you?" Eliana asked, not stepping back but not stepping forward either. "I'm a response," the man said, turning toward her. "A consequence of your curiosity." Security stormed in seconds later, but it was too late. The man handed Eliana the device, placed it gently in her hand like a gift, and whispered, "The planet did not vanish. It evolved." Then he collapsed. No pulse, no wound, no sign of life. Medical scans showed no organic structure inside him. He wasn't human, at least not entirely. Back in the lab, the device he'd left behind came to life under Eliana's touch. Its surface shimmered, then projected a holographic stream of code and symbols not found in any known language. But the message that emerged was chillingly clear, translated by the array's automated systems as though it had been waiting for her. Sequence initialized. Observer node, Earth. Simulation phase 2 begins now. Eliana stared at it, blood draining from her face. "Simulation," whispered Basu. "Are we part of something?" "I don't know," she said, "but if we are, someone just pressed play." The room stood silent. Outside, the mountains lay still under a gray sky. Somewhere far beyond the stars, a vanished world had sent its emissary, and now its second move. The device was sealed in a vacuum-safe chamber and monitored around the clock. Scientists, linguists, quantum theorists, everyone took their turn, and none got closer to understanding it than Eliana. The strange thing was, the device only responded to her. When others touched it, it stayed dormant. But with her, it pulsed, displayed messages, and sometimes even asked questions. The first question came just before dawn. "Would you change what must happen?" She didn't answer, not out loud, but the device replied anyway. "You already have." By midday, new transmissions began coming in, not from HD 98800C, but from somewhere else. The source couldn't be triangulated. The signals arrived faster, louder, and were unlike the first, frantic, scrambled, almost panicked. Basu called them the second voice. They're not from the same source, he said, eyes flicking across spectral graphs. Different modulation, different energy profile. If the first voice is a curator, the second is a protest. Carter didn't like the metaphor. Protest? Protest against what? Us, Eliana said, or what the first signal is doing to us. The new messages were harder to decrypt. Some came as visual noise, flashes of impossible geometry. Others were sound, distorted voices crying out in languages no one had spoken in millennia. But one fragment finally broke through. A human phrase buried in a torrent of alien data. Don't follow it. That night, Eliana dreamt of a vast lattice in space, stretching between stars like a web. At its center sat a dying sun, and orbiting it, a world with no surface, just layers upon layers of reflection. In the dream, she stood on that planet looking up and saw Earth in the sky. She awoke with a start. The device had activated itself again. The display shimmered. 2035, Mars. The silence is your doing. No, she whispered. I haven't done anything. Not yet. The device pulsed once. Exactly. The Mars mission was scheduled to depart in 2 weeks. It was the largest interplanetary expedition in human history. Over 200 engineers, scientists, terraformers, and security personnel bound for the expanding colony at Utopia Planitia. Billions had been invested, years of preparation, and now a single line from an alien signal threatened to stop it cold. 2035, the Mars outpost. Silence. In the Geneva facility, the echo chamber split. One faction, led by Carter, argued the message was either a manipulative bluff or a misunderstood metaphor. Silence could mean comms interference, solar activity, anything. We can't halt a mission this massive because of a hunch. The other faction, now quietly orbiting Iliana, saw the prediction as a warning, perhaps even a plea. If we let them go, Basu said, and they vanish, we will have chosen to ignore the future. But what if we've misunderstood? Eliana countered. What if the silence is what happens if we intervene? What if trying to avoid it causes it? No one spoke. They were inside a paradox, one constructed, it seemed, by design. The debate reached the highest levels. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session. News of the Martian warning had leaked, and social networks exploded with theories: apocalyptic, conspiratorial, spiritual. Some believed the planet was cursed, others said it was destiny. And through it all, the second voice screamed louder. More signals, more scrambled data, some of it appearing in Earth's systems without transmission, messages materializing on secure servers, broadcast towers, and closed networks. The sequence is a trap. You are being curated. Nothing that watches wants you free. That night, Eliana stood alone in the observatory above the lab. The stars outside blinked indifferently. She placed her hand on the device again. Are we being manipulated? She asked. The reply came not in text, but in vision, shimmering lines of possibility, branching futures like tangled roots. In one, the Mars mission launched and went dark, just as the message foretold. In another, it was delayed indefinitely, but civil unrest spread like wildfire, driven by fear and suspicion. In a third, the mission launched with her on board. That final thread burned brightest, and then it ended. Abruptly, the device faded. Why show me that? She whispered. And for the first time, it answered with something unsettlingly close to compassion. Because now you understand. The future is not a line, it is a choice. And someone has already made theirs. They offered her a seat on the mission. Not as a scientist, though her credentials far exceeded those of most crew members, but as a strategic observer. The Council wanted her on Mars when the future either fulfilled its promise or defied it. Publicly, they claimed it was to restore confidence in the mission. Privately, they wanted her as a variable, one they could measure, track, and, if necessary, control. Eliana said yes. 3 days later, she was aboard the Vanguard Horizon, strapped into a mag-locked berth as Earth shrank into blue mist behind her. 200 souls, 16 months of life support. One planetary prediction hanging over them like a sword. The moment they left orbit, the device activated again. It had traveled with her, sealed in a leaded case, under guard, though everyone knew it wouldn't respond to anyone else. She opened it in her cabin as the ship sailed past the moon. This time, it didn't offer a message. It emitted a tone, low, harmonic, like the sound of a cathedral submerged in deep water. The lights in her room dimmed. Her thoughts felt interrupted. And then she saw them. 3 others on the ship, faces she knew but hadn't paid much attention to. A botanist from Lagos, a systems engineer from Luna Base, and a pilot's assistant with no flight record, no digital trail, no registered birthplace. Passengers who didn't belong. She accessed the crew manifest. Officially, all 3 had passed security. Yet something in the tone from the device had drawn her attention to them. And as she watched them through surveillance logs, she noticed something chilling. They never blinked. In hours of footage, not once did their eyes close. They moved just slightly out of sync with everyone else. Half a second too late, or too early, as if following a different rhythm. Basu had once warned her, "If this signal is part of a larger intelligence, Eliana, it won't send only messages. It will send agents." And now, those agents were here. The Mars outpost wasn't the only thing going silent. The ship itself had become a question, wrapped in code, carrying a woman who might still change everything, and 3 beings who seemed ready to ensure she didn't. Somewhere beyond the red horizon, Mars waited, and so did the silence. The Vanguard Horizon entered Martian orbit under full lockdown. Eliana hadn't slept in 2 days. The ship's lights flickered intermittently. Crew reported strange mechanical glitches, doors locking and unlocking at random, gravity shifting in brief pulses, camera feeds showing rooms before anyone entered them. No one spoke of the 3 passengers. No one dared. Eliana kept the device with her at all times now. It no longer displayed words. Instead, it projected shapes, impossible structures that folded and unfolded like paper in a dimension they couldn't name. Every time she looked away, she felt the shapes move behind her eyes. They landed on Mars during a blinding dust storm. The colony outpost, sleek, gleaming, and silent, stood in the valley as expected. But no one came to greet them. No lights, no movement, no signal, just silence. The doors opened. Eliana stepped out first, the fine red dust clinging to her suit like ash. She moved through the outpost's halls, heart pounding. Everything inside was pristine. No signs of damage, no struggle. But also, no life. She found the crew logs. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. It ended mid-sentence. Object approaching. No response to hails, internal systems. Then nothing. Carter called her from the command deck. "We found something buried near the landing zone. You need to see it." She ran. What they uncovered wasn't natural. A sphere, half submerged in the Martian soil, humming at the exact same frequency as her device. Symbols spiraled across its surface, identical to the ones she'd seen in the visions. A transmission clicked through her helmet. Not from Earth, not from the ship. From them. "You are the constant, the pivot. The simulation collapses without belief." The ground trembled. The device in her hand vibrated so violently she dropped it. The sphere cracked open. A column of light erupted, and in it she saw the 3 passengers approaching, no longer bothering to pretend. Their faces shimmered with shifting patterns. Their eyes glowed not with malice but with intention, as if they were merely part of a process unfolding exactly as written. "You were never meant to reach Mars," one said. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "But you chose to. The signal was a fork. This is what happens when the unknown is touched too soon." Carter raised his weapon. Eliana stopped him with a look. "What are we inside?" she asked, her voice cracking. The beings regarded her in silence, and then one answered, "A rehearsal." The world went white. When Eliana opened her eyes, she was back in the Geneva facility. The screens flickered with static. The room was empty. No Carter, no Basu, no Mars, just her, and the device sitting on the desk, quietly blinking. A message waited. "Thank you for your participation. Simulation terminated. Memory residuals may persist. Please make your final choice. Proceed. Forget." She stared at the blinking options. Somewhere far away or very near, a planet that had once vanished waited to vanish again, or return, depending on her choice. She reached forward and pressed